By the 1st of November, the days were shortening fast. Leanie felt the loss of every moment of light. Dawn came reluctantly at 9 a.m., and night reclaimed the world around 5 p.m. Barely 8 hours of daylight now. 16 hours of darkness. Night swept in like nothing Leanie had ever seen before, like the winged shadow of a creature too big and predatory to comprehend. Weather had become impossible to predict. It had rained and snowed and rained again. Now the late afternoon sky spit down at them, a freezing mixture of sleet and rain. Water pooled on the ground, turned to sheets of dirty, weed-studded ice. Leanie had to do her chores in muck. After feeding the goats and chickens, she trudged into the woods behind the house, carrying 2 empty buckets. The cottonwoods were bare. Autumn had turned them into skeletons. Everything with a heartbeat was hunkered down somewhere, trying to get out of the sleet and rain. As she walked down toward the river, a cold wind pulled at her hair, whined across her jacket. She hunched her shoulders and kept her head down. It took 5 trips to fill the steel water barrel they kept at the side of the house. Rain helped, but couldn't be relied upon. Water, like firewood, could never be left to chance. She was sweating hard, scooping a bucket of water from the creek, slopping it across her boots, when night fell. And she meant fell. It hit hard and fast, like a lid clanging down on its pot. When Leanie turned homeward, she saw an endless black expanse. Nothing distinguishable, no stars overhead, no moon to light a path. She fumbled in her parka pocket for the headlamp her dad had given her. She adjusted the strap and put it on, snapping the light switch. She pulled a pistol out of its holster, stuck it in her waistband. Her heart was hammering in her chest as she bent down and picked up the 2 buckets she'd filled with water. The metal handles bit into her gloved hands. The icy rain turned to snow, stung her cheeks and forehead. Winter. The bears aren't in hibernation yet, are they? They are most dangerous now, feeding hungrily before going to sleep. She saw a pair of yellow eyes staring at her from the darkness. No, she was imagining it. The ground beneath her changed, gave way. She stumbled. Water sloshed out of the buckets and onto her gloves. Don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. Her headlamp revealed a fallen log in front of her. Breathing hard, she stepped over it, heard the screech of bark against her jeans, and kept going. Up a hill, down one, around a dense black thicket. Finally, up ahead, she saw a glimmer. Light. The cabin. She wanted to run. She was desperate to get home, to feel her mother's arms around her. But she wasn't stupid. She had already made one mistake. She hadn't kept track of time. As she neared the cabin, the night separated a little. She saw charcoal outlines against the black, the sheen of the metal stovepipe poking up through the roof, a side window full of light, the shadow of people inside. The air smelled of wood smoke and welcome. Leanie rushed around to the side of the cabin, lifted the barrel's makeshift lid, and poured what was left of her water into the barrel. The split second between her upending the bucket and the sound of the water splashing in told her the barrel was about 3/4 full. Leanie was shaking so hard it took 2 tries for her to unlatch the door. "I'm back," she said, stepping into the cabin, her whole body shaking. "Shut up, Leanie," Dad snapped. Mama stood in front of Dad. She was unsteady looking, dressed in ragged sweats and a big sweater. "Hey there, baby girl," she said. "Hang up your parka and take off your boots." "I'm talking to you, Cora," Dad said. Leanie heard anger in his voice, saw her mother flinch. "You have to take the rice back. Tell Large Marge we can't pay for it. And the pilot bread and powdered milk, too." "But you haven't gotten a moose yet," Mama said. "We need—" "It's all my fault, is it?" Dad shouted. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. But winter's bearing down on us. We need more food than we have, and our money." "You think I don't know we need money?" He swiped at the chair in front of him, sent it tumbling and cracking to the floor. The sudden wildness in his eyes, the showing of the whites, scared Lenny. She took a step backward. Mama went to him, touched his face, tried to gentle him. "Baby, we'll figure it out." He yanked back and headed for the door. Grabbing his parka from its place on the hook by the window, he pulled the door open, let in the sweeping cold, and slammed it shut behind him. A moment later, the VW bus engine roared to life. Headlights stabbed through the window, turned Mama golden white. "It's the weather," Mama said, lighting a cigarette, watching him drive away. Her beautiful skin looked sallow in the headlights' glow, almost waxen. "It's going to get worse," Lenny said. "Every day is darker and colder." "Yeah," Mama said, looking as scared as Lenny suddenly felt. "I know." Winter tightened its grip on Alaska. The vastness of the landscape dwindled down to the confines of their cabin. The sun rose at 10:15 in the morning and set only 15 minutes after the end of the school day. Less than 6 hours of light a day. Snow fell endlessly, blanketed everything. It piled up in drifts and spun its lace across window panes, leaving them nothing to see except themselves. In the few daylight hours, the sky stretched gray overhead. Some days there was merely the memory of light rather than any real glow. Wind scoured the landscape, cried out as if in pain. The fireweed froze, turned into intricate ice sculptures that stuck up from the snow. In the freezing cold, everything stuck. Car doors froze, windows cracked, engines refused to start. The ham radio filled with warnings of bad weather and listed the deaths that were as common in Alaska in the winter as frozen eyelashes. People died for the smallest mistake: car keys dropped in a river, a gas tank gone dry, a snow machine breaking down, a turn taken too fast. Lenny couldn't go anywhere or do anything without a warning. Already, the winter seemed to have gone on forever. Shore ice seized the coastline, glazed the shells and stones until the beach looked like a silver-sequined collar. Wind roared across the homestead, as it had all winter, transforming the white landscape with every breath. Trees cowered in the face of it. Animals built dens and burrowed holes and went into hiding. Not so different from the humans, who hunkered down in this cold, took special care. Lenny's life was the smallest it had ever been. On good days, when the bus would start and the weather was bearable, there was school. On bad days, there was only work, accomplished in this driving, demoralizing cold. Lenny focused on what needed to be done: going to school, doing homework, feeding the animals, carrying water, cracking ice, darning socks, repairing clothes, cooking with Mama, cleaning the cabin, feeding the wood stove. Every day, more and more wood had to be chopped and carried and stacked. There was no room in these shortened days to think about anything beyond the mechanics of survival. They were growing starter vegetables in Dixie cups on a table beneath the loft. Even the practice of survival skills at the Harlan compound on weekends had been suspended. Worse than the weather was the confinement it caused. As winter pared their life away, the Albrights were left with only each other. Every evening was spent together, hours and hours of night, huddled around the wood stove. They were all on edge. Arguments erupted between her parents over money, over chores, over the weather, over nothing. Leanie knew how anxious Dad was about their inadequate supplies and their non-existent money. She saw how it gnawed at him. She saw, too, how closely Mama watched him, how worried she was about his rising anxiety. His struggle for calm was obvious in a dozen tics and in the way he seemed unwilling to look at them sometimes. He woke well before dawn and stayed outside working as long as he could, coming back in well after dark and covered in snow, his mustache and eyebrows frozen, the tip of his nose white. The effort he made to keep his temper in check was apparent. As the days shortened and the nights lengthened, he began pacing after dinner, getting agitated and muttering to himself. On those bad nights, he took the traps Mad Earl had taught him to use and went trapping in the deep woods alone and came back exhausted, haggard-looking, quiet, himself. More often than not, he came home successful in the hunt, with fox or marten furs to sell in town. He made just enough money to keep them afloat, but even Leanie could see the empty shelves in their root cellar. No meal was ever big enough to fill them up. The money Mama had borrowed from Grandma was long gone, and there was none to take its place, so Leanie had stopped taking pictures, and Mama barely smoked. Large Marge sometimes gave them cigarettes and film for free when Dad wasn't looking, but they didn't go into town often. Dad's intentions were good, but even so, it was like living with a wild animal, like those crazy hippies the Alaskans talked about, who lived with wolves and bears and invariably ended up getting killed. The natural-born predator could seem domesticated, even friendly, could lick your throat affectionately or rub up against you to get a back scratch. But you knew, or should know, that it was a wild thing you lived with, that a collar and leash and a bowl of food might tame the actions of the beast but couldn't change its essential nature. In a split second, less time than it took to exhale a breath, that wolf could claim its nature and turn, fangs bared. It was exhausting to worry all the time, to study Dad's every movement and the tone of his voice. It had obviously worn Mama down. Anxiety had pulled the light from her eyes and the glow from her skin. Or maybe the pallor came from living like mushrooms. On an especially cold, late November day, Leanie woke to the sound of screaming. Something crashed to the floor. She knew instantly what was happening. Her dad had had a nightmare, his third one this week. She crawled out of her sleeping bag and went to the edge of the loft, peering down. Mama stood by the beaded door of their bedroom, holding a lantern high. In its glow, she looked scared, her hair a mess, wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt. The wood stove was a dot of orange in the dark. Dad was like an untamed animal, shoving, tearing, snarling, saying words she couldn't understand. Then he was wrenching open boxes, looking for something. Mama approached him cautiously, laid a hand on his back. He shoved her aside so hard she cracked into the log wall, cried out. Dad stopped, jerked upright. His nostrils flared. He was flexing and unflexing his right hand. When he saw Mama, everything changed. His shoulders rounded, his head hung in shame. "Jesus, Cora," he whispered brokenly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where I was." "I know," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. He went to her and folded her in his arms, held her. They sank to their knees together, foreheads touching. Leanie could hear them talking, but couldn't make out the words. She returned to her sleeping bag and tried to go back to sleep. "Leanie, get up! We're going hunting. I've got to get out of the goddamn house." With a sigh, she dressed in the darkness. In the first months of this Alaskan winter, she had learned to live like one of those phosphorescent invertebrates that roamed the seafloor, their lives untouched by any light or color except that which they generated themselves. In the living room, the wood stove offered light through a narrow window in the black metal door. She could make out the silhouettes of her parents standing beside it, could hear their breathing. Coffee gurgled in a metal pot on top of the stove, puffed its welcoming scent into the darkness. Dad lit a lantern, held it up. In its orange glow, he looked haggard, tightly wound. A tick played at the corner of his right eye. "You guys ready?" Mama looked exhausted. Dressed in a huge parka and insulated pants, she looked too fragile for the weather and too tired to hike for much of a distance. In a week of rising nightmares and middle-of-the-night screaming, she wasn't sleeping well. "Sure," Mama said. "I love to hunt at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning." Leanie went to the hooks on the wall, grabbed the gray parka and insulated pants she'd found at the Salvation Army in Homer last month, and the second-hand bunny boots Matthew had given her. She pulled down down-filled gloves out of her parka pockets. "Good," Dad said. "Let's go." This pre-dawn world was hushed. There was no wind, no cracking branches, just the endless sifting downward of snow, the white accumulating everywhere. Leanie trudged through the snow toward the animal pens. The goats stood huddled together, bleating at her arrival, bumping into each other. She tossed them a flake of hay and then fed the chickens and broke the ice on their water troughs. When she got to the VW bus, Mama was already inside. Leanie climbed into the back seat. In this cold, the bus took a long time to start, and even longer for the windows to defrost. The vehicle was not good in this part of the world. They'd learned that the hard way. Dad put chains on the tires and tossed a gear bag in the well between the front seats. Leanie sat in the back, her arms crossed, shivering, intermittently falling asleep and waking up. On the main road, Dad turned right, toward town, but before the airstrip, he turned left onto the road that led to the abandoned chromium mine. They drove for miles on the hard-packed snow, the road a series of sharp switchbacks that seemed to be cut into the side of the mountain. Deep in the woods, high on the mountain, he parked suddenly with a jarring stomp on the brakes and handed them each a headlamp and a shotgun before hefting a pack and opening his door. Wind and snow and cold swept into the bus. It couldn't be much above zero up here. She fit the headlamp over her head, adjusted the strap, and turned on the light. It provided a bright, thin beam of light directly ahead. No stars, no starlight, snow falling hard and fast, a deep, abiding black full of whispering trees and crouching, hidden predators. Dad took off in front, trudging through the snow in his snowshoes, forging a path. Leanie let Mama go next and then fell in step behind her. They walked for so long that Leanie's cheeks went from cold to hot to numb, long enough that her eyelashes and nostril hairs froze, that she felt her own sweat accumulating under her long underwear, itching. At some point, she started to smell, and it made her wonder what else could smell her. It was easy to go from predator to prey out here. Leanie was so tired, just trudging forward, chin down, shoulders hunched, that it barely registered that at some point she began to see her own feet, her boots, her snowshoes. At first, there was the gray, ambient glow, light that wasn't quite real, bleeding up from the snow. And then the dawn, pink as salmon meat, buttery. Daylight. Leanie finally saw her surroundings. They were on a frozen river. It horrified her to realize she had followed Dad blindly onto its slick surface. What if the ice was too thin? One wrong step and someone could have plunged into the icy water and been swept away. Beneath her, she heard a cracking sound. Dad walked confidently forward, seemingly unconcerned about the ice beneath his feet. On the other shore, he cut a path through stubby, snow-coated brush, stared down, tilted his head as if he were listening. His face above the snowy beard was red with cold. She knew he was following sign. Droppings, tracks. Snowshoe hares did most of their feeding and movement at dawn and dusk. He stopped suddenly. "There's a hare over there," he said to Leanie, "at the edge of the trees." Leanie looked in the direction he pointed. Everything was white, even the sky. Shapes were difficult to distinguish in this white-on-white world. Then, movement. A plump white hare hopped forward. "Yeah," she said, "I see it." "Okay, Leanie, this is your hunt. Breathe, relax, wait for the shot," Dad said. She lifted her gun. She'd been target shooting for months, so she knew what to do. She breathed in and out instead of holding her breath. She focused on the hare, aimed. She waited. The world fell away, became simple. There was just her and the hare, predator and prey, connected. She squeezed the trigger. It all seemed to happen simultaneously. The shot, the hit, the kill, the hare slumping sideways. A good, clean shot. "Excellent," Dad said. Leanie slung her shotgun over her shoulder, and the three of them set off single file for the tree line and Leanie's kill. When they reached the hare, Leanie stared down at it, the soft white body sprayed with blood, lying in a pool of it. She'd killed something, fed her family for another night. Killed something, stopped a life. She didn't know how to feel about it, or maybe she just felt two conflicting emotions at the same time, proud and sad. In truth, she almost wanted to cry. But she was Alaskan now. This was her life. Without hunting, there was no food on the table, and nothing would go to waste. The fur would be made into a hat. The bones would make a soup stock. Tonight, Mama would fry the meat in home-churned butter made from goat's milk and season it with onions and garlic. They might even splurge and add a few potatoes. Her dad knelt in the snow. She saw the shaking of his hands and could tell by the grim set to his mouth that he had a headache as he turned the dead hare onto its back. He placed his blade at the tail and cut upward, through the skin and bone, in a single sweeping cut. At the hare's breastbone, he slowed, positioned one bloody finger under the knife blade, and proceeded cautiously to avoid accidentally cutting any organs. He opened the animal, reached in and pulled out the entrails, which he left in a steaming red-pink pile on the snow. He picked out the small, plump heart and held it up to Leanie. Blood leaked between his fingers. "You're the hunter. Eat the heart." "Earned, please," Mama said. "That's exactly what we are," he said, in a voice as cold as the wind at their back. "Eat it." Leanie's gaze cut to Mama, who looked as horrified as Leanie felt. "Are you going to make me ask again?" Dad said. The quiet of his voice was worse than yelling. Leanie felt a ridge of fear poke up, spread along her spine. She reached out, took the tiny blue-red organ in her hand. Was it still beating, or was she trembling? With her father's narrowed gaze steady on her, she put the heart in her mouth and forced her lips to close. Instantly, she wanted to gag. The heart was slippery and slimy. When she bit down, it ruptured in her mouth, tasting metallic. She felt blood trickle out of the side of her mouth. She swallowed, gagged, wiped the blood from her lips, felt its warmth smear across her cheek. Her father looked up, just enough to make eye contact. He looked ruined, tired, but present. In his eyes, he saw more love and sadness than should be able to exist in one human being. Something was tearing him up inside, even now. It was the other man, the bad man, who lived inside of him and tried to break out in the darkness. "I'm trying to make you self-sufficient." It sounded like an apology, but for what? For being crazy sometimes, or teaching her to hunt, or for making her eat the hare's beating heart, or for the nightmares that ruined all their sleep. Or maybe he was apologizing for something he hadn't done yet, but was afraid he would. December. Dad was edgy, tense, he drank too much, and muttered under his breath. The nightmares became more frequent, 3 a week, every week. He was always moving, demanding, pushing. He ate, slept, breathed, and drank survival. He had become a soldier again, or that's what Mama said, and Lenny found herself tongue-tied around him, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. With as hard as she worked after school and on the weekends, Lenny should have slept like the dead, but she didn't. Night after night, she lay awake, worrying. Her fear and anxiety about the world had been sharpened to a knife point. Tonight, as exhausted as she was, she lay awake, listening for his screams. When she did finally fall asleep, she landed in a dreamscape on fire, a place full of danger, a world at war, animals being slaughtered, girls being kidnapped, men screaming and pointing guns. She screamed for Matthew, but no one could hear one girl's voice in a falling-apart world. And besides, what good would he be? She couldn't tell Matthew this, not this. Some fears you carried alone. "Leanie!" She heard her name being called from far away. Where was she? It was the middle of the night. Was she still dreaming? Someone grabbed her, yanked her out of bed. It was real this time. A hand clamped over her mouth. She recognized his smell. "Dad?" she said through his hand. "Come on," he said. "Now." She stumbled over to the ladder, climbed down behind him in an utter darkness. None of the lamps were lit downstairs, but she could hear her mother breathing heavily. Dad led Lenny to the newly fixed and steady card table, guided her to a seat. "Ernst, really?" Mama said. "Shut up, Cora," Dad said. Something banged onto the table in front of Lenny with a clatter and a clang. "What is it?" he said, standing right next to her. She reached out, her fingers trailing across the rough surface of the card table. A rifle, in pieces. "You need better training, Lenny. When TSHTF, we'll have to do things differently. What if it's winter? Everything might be dark. You'll be off guard, confused, sleepy. Excuses will get you killed. I want you to be able to do everything in the dark when you're scared." "Ernst," Mama said from the darkness, her voice uneven, "she's just a girl. Let her go back to bed." When men are starving and we have food, will they care that she's just a girl? Lenny heard the click of a stopwatch. "Go, Lenny. Clean your weapon, put it back together." Lenny reached out, felt for the cold pieces of the rifle, pulled them toward her. The darkness unnerved her, made her slow. She saw a match flare in the darkness, smelled a cigarette being lit. "Stop," Dad said. A flashlight beam erupted, blared into being, focused on the rifle. "Unacceptable. You're dead. All of our food is gone. Maybe one of them is thinking of rape." He grabbed the rifle, disassembled it, and pushed the pieces to the center of the table. In the blast of light, Lenny saw the rifle in parts, in addition to a cleaning rod, cloths, some Hops 9 solvent and rust protector, a few screwdrivers. She tried to memorize where everything was. He was right. She needed to know how to do this, or she could be killed. Concentrate. The light clicked off. The stopwatch clicked on. Go. Lenny reached out, trying to remember what she'd seen. She pulled the rifle parts toward her, assembled it quickly, screwed the scope in place. She was reaching for the cleaning cloth when the stopwatch clicked off. Dead, Dad said in disgust. Try again. Yesterday, on the second Saturday in December, they joined their neighbors for a tree-cutting party. They all hiked out into the wilderness and chose trees. Dad cut down an evergreen, dragged it onto their sled, and hauled it back to the cabin, where they placed it in the corner beneath the loft. They decorated it with family Polaroids and fishing lures. A few presents wrapped in yellowed pages from the Anchorage Daily Times were positioned beneath the fragrant green branches. Magic marker lines pretended to be ribbon. The propane-fueled hanging lanterns created a warm interior, their light a sharp contrast to the still dark morning. Wind clawed at the eaves. Every now and then, a tree branch smacked hard against the cabin. Now, on Sunday afternoon, Mama was in the kitchen making sourdough bread. The yeasty fragrance of baking bread filled the cabin. The bad weather kept them all inside. Dad was hunched over the ham radio, listening to scratchy voices, his fingers constantly working the knobs. Lainey heard the staticky sound of Mad Earl's voice, his high-pitched cackle coming through loud and clear. Lainey sat huddled on the sofa, reading the ragged paperback copy of Go Ask Alice she'd found at the dump. The world felt impossibly small here. The drapes were drawn tightly for warmth, and the door was locked shut against cold and predators. "What was that? Say again, over?" Dad said. He was hunched over the ham radio, listening. "Marge, is that you?" Lainey heard Large Marge's voice come through the radio, broken up, spangled with static. "Emergency. Lost. Search party. Past Walker cabin. Meet on Mine Road. Out." Lainey put down her book, sat up. Who is lost? In this weather? "Large Marge," Dad said. "Come in. Who is it? Earl, you there?" Static. Dad turned. "Get dressed. Someone needs help." Mama took the half-baked bread out of the oven and set it on the counter, covering it with a dishcloth. Lainey dressed in the warmest clothes she had, Carhartt insulated pants, rolled up at the hem, parka, bunny boots. Within 5 minutes of the call from Large Marge, Lainey was in the back of the bus, waiting for the engine to start. It would be a while. Finally, Dad got the windshield scraped enough to see through. Then he checked the chains and climbed into the driver's seat. It's a bad day for someone to get lost. Dad slowly maneuvered around in the axle-deep snow, turned toward their driveway, which was a thick, unbroken layer of white without tire tracks, bracketed by snow-covered trees. Lainey could see her breath. That was how cold it was inside the bus. Snow built up and disappeared on the windshield in between each swipe of the wiper blades. As they neared town, vehicles appeared out of the curtain of falling snow in front of them, headlights glowing through the gloom. Up ahead, Lainey saw amber and red lights flashing. That would be Natalie and her snowplow, leading the way onto a barely there road that led toward the old mine. Dad eased up on the gas. They slowed, pulled into line behind a big pickup truck that belonged to Clyde Harlan, and drove up the mountain. When they reached a clearing, Lainey saw a bunch of snow machines. Lainey still thought of them as snowmobiles, but no one called them that up here, parked in an uneven line. They belonged to the residents who lived in the bush, without roads to their homesteads. All of them had their lights on and their engines running. Falling snow braided through the light beams and gave it all an eerie, otherworldly look. Dad parked alongside a snow machine. Lainey followed her parents out into the falling snow and howling wind, into the kind of cold that burrowed deep. They saw Mad Earl and Thelma and made their way over to their friends. "What's up?" Dad shouted to be heard above the wind. Before Mad Earl or Thelma could answer, Lainey heard the high-pitched wail of a whistle being blown. A man in a heavy blue insulated parka and pants stepped forward. A wide-brimmed hat identified him as a policeman. I'm Kurt Ward. Thanks for coming. Geneva and Matthew Walker are missing. They were supposed to arrive at their hunting cabin an hour ago. This is their usual route. If they're lost or hurt, we should find them between here and the cabin." Leanie didn't realize she'd cried out until she felt her mother's reassuring touch. "Matthew?" She looked up at her mother. "He'll freeze out here," she said. "It will be night soon." Before Mama could answer, Officer Ward said, "Space yourselves about 20 feet apart." He began handing out flashlights. Leanie turned her flashlight on, stared out at the lane of snow-covered ground in front of her. The whole world spiraled down to a single strip of land. She saw it in layers: bumpy white snow-covered ground, snow-filled air, white trees pointing up to a gray sky. "Where are you, Matthew?" She moved slowly, doggedly forward, distantly aware of other searchers, other lights. She heard dogs barking and voices raised. Searchlights crisscrossed each other. Time passed in a weird, surreal way, in light diminishing and breaths exhaled. Leanie saw animal tracks, a pile of bones mixed with fresh blood, fallen spruce needles. Wind had sculpted the snow into peaks and swirls, with glazed and hardened icy tips. Tree wells were black with debris, made by animals into makeshift dens that gave them a place to sleep out of the wind. The trees around her thickened. The temperature dropped suddenly. She felt a rush of cold as day gave way to night. It stopped snowing. Wind pushed the clouds away and left in their stead a navy blue sky awash in swirls of starlight. A gibbous moon shone down, its light bright on the snow. Ambient silver light set the world aglow. She saw something: arms, reaching up from the snow, thin fingers splayed out, frozen. She lunged forward through the deep snow, said, "I'm coming, Matthew," through wheezing, painful breaths, her light bobbing up and down in front of her. Antlers, a full set, shed by a bull moose. Or maybe beneath this snow lay the bones left by a poacher. Like so many sins, the snow covered it all. The truth wouldn't be revealed until spring, if ever. The wind picked up, banged through the trees, sent branches flying. She trudged forward, one light amid dozens spread out through the glowing blue-white-black forest, pinpricks of yellow, searching, searching. She heard Mr. Walker's voice call out, yelling Matthew's name so often he started to sound hoarse. "There, up ahead," someone yelled. And Mr. Walker yelled back, "I see him." Leanie plunged forward, trying to run through the deep snow. Up ahead, she saw a shadowy lump, a person, kneeling by the side of a frozen river in the moonlight, head bowed forward. Leanie shoved through the crowd, elbowed her way to the front just as Mr. Walker squatted beside his son. "Maddie," he shouted, to be heard, laid a gloved hand on his son's back. I'm here. Where's your mom?" Matthew's head slowly turned. His face was starkly white, his lips were chapped. His green eyes seemed to have lost their hue, taken color from the ice around him. The ice beneath him glowed with moonlight. He was shaking uncontrollably. "She's gone," he croaked, his voice raw. "Fell." Mr. Walker hauled his son to his feet. Twice Matthew almost collapsed, but his dad held him upright. Leanie heard people talking in snippets. "Fell through the ice. Should know better. Jesus." "Come on," Officer Ward said. "Let him through. We need to get this kid warmed up."